Hi, this is Brass Check, and today we have a special report on Louis Pasteur and Gerald L. Geisen. And you may be asking, who the heck is Gerald L. Geisen? Geisen was a scholar, and his area of specialty was the history of science. And he earned a doctorate on that from Yale University, and then he joined Princeton's faculty. And he was the director of Princeton's program in history of science from 1980 to 1986, and he also directed the program's graduate studies for many years. And he received many honors and invitations to lecture on his work. The American Association for the History of Medicine awarded him a prize in 1996 for a book on Pasteur. He was also a visiting scholar at the Institute for Advanced Study and a visiting historical scholar at the National Library of Medicine, and many other accolades. So he was a very, very serious scholar about the history of science. There's no debate about that. Over the course of his career, he wrote about 40 scholarly essays and book reviews, and he contributed 20 articles to the Dictionary of Scientific Biography. Now, a guy that does history of science is unlikely to be writing a lot of scientific things because he's a historian, but he did write quite a bit. And he wrote two books. One, the Cambridge School of Physiology, Michael Foster and the Cambridge School of Physiology, the Scientific Enterprise in Late Victorian Society. That came out in 1978. But his most important book was The Private Science of Louis Pasteur, which came out in 1995. And I pointed out already he was awarded a prize for that book. So this is a very serious scholar of the history of science indeed. No question about that. Now, one of the things you'll notice is that when somebody wants to advance an agenda, and by the way, I'm not accusing Geisen of advancing an agenda, as you'll see shortly. But as a general principle, when somebody wants to advance a fraudulent agenda, let's put it that way, they find some bum and they elevate him to near deity status. I think if you've ever seen any scammy internet marketing promotions, they usually take somebody that's never done or accomplished anything and make that person into some superhero genius, and that's why you should give him $5,000 for his coaching or some nonsense like that. Why do people do it? Because it works. Another really classic example would be Tony Fauci, a bum if there ever was one. Incompetent, dishonest, manipulative, Napoleonic, complex, just a thoroughly bad guy. But he's been elevated to the to the role of sainthood. In fact, we did a film called HIV equals AIDS, Fauci's first fraud, and the very beginning of the film just shows that whole deification process. So another case of somebody being deified who really maybe wasn't that good a guy is Louis Pasteur. So the formula is simple. Somebody has a commercial agenda, in the obvious case of internet scam artists, but also in the case of pushing vaccination, mass vaccination of the entire planet. You need a front man, and you need to elevate that front man, and that's what they did with Fauci. Well, something very similar was done with Louis Pasteur, and the fundamental thesis, especially today, it's always been a problem, but it's so much exponentially a problem, is that all disease worth thinking about comes from infectious sources, so viruses, bacteria, and so on. They're the source of the disease. They're the cause of the disease. They're the reason for the disease, and that we can solve that with better drugs and vaccinating the entire global population. It's a big money maker. Unfortunately, it's based on really shady and shaky ground. People get sick for a wide variety of reasons. One of them is the fact that everyone's going to die at some point anyway, so there is an expiration date on all of us. But more pertinently, when people are sick prematurely, or die prematurely, or become seriously ill, the causes are many, and they all involve a breakdown of the human body. From what? From the following sources. Malnutrition is a big one. Now we're familiar with the idea of malnutrition in India or in Africa or places that are dirt poor, but there's a lot of malnutrition in advanced countries, especially in the United States, where people have taken to voluntarily eating garbage. Now they've been tricked into eating garbage, but they're doing it voluntarily. Nobody's holding a gun to their head. So lots of corn syrup, lots of food additives, lots of absolute junk. And so if you're eating and fueling yourself on junk, you are probably not getting the nutrients that you need to have a healthy body. And so people that eat that way tend to get sick. They also tend to get obese. It's one of the causes of obesity, because your body knows it needs more, knows it's not getting it, so it solves the problem by going and eating more and more and more and more to try to somehow get the nutrients it needs. So malnutrition, which is a societally created disease. We've got bureaucrats in Washington and around the world that help out the food manufacturing industry by permitting the addition of, toxic. I mean, not immediately eat it and you die that minute, but things that are toxic in food supplies. There are lots, we've done videos on this before, there are lots of things in American food that if you put them in food in China and they caught you, you'd go to jail. That's how bad our system is. Canada also, for all its insanity, actually has pretty strict food adulteration laws. Europe certainly does. US, it's anything goes. If can you deliver the right money to the right guy, you can put it in food. So we got a combination of toxic ingredients in food, plus just junk, like corn syrup, like soybeans, glyphosate saturated soybeans and corn products, which is what a frighteningly large number of the population is living on, right? So then there's environmental pollution, bad air, bad water. Then there's the stress of I won't say the normal stress of life. I'll say the stress of life created by our society, and it boils down to financial, being terrified on a nonstop basis by the voodoo witch doctors of the news media. Anyway, so a lot of things contribute to ill health, and it may well be that infectious disease is really just what happens when people are just totally beaten down and their immune system is so weak that anything can get in there and have its way. But that's not the model that Louis Pasteur sold. Louis Pasteur, and by the way, we know this is true because somebody can be amongst people with so-called contagious diseases and not get the disease. So that's a big problem for the virus is all theory. How does that work? If this thing is so virulent and has a mind of its own and can jump from body to body and take your body over, why is it that not everybody gets, if the theory of contagious disease were true, the whole planet would be dead. It would have died off a long time ago, because whatever gruesome contagious disease there was never would have stopped, just would have kept going. And of course, the drug companies and the vaccine companies love to take credit for stopping these things because they're so heroic and they're so ingenious. But anyway, all this flows from Pasteur. Now let's get back to the subject of our call, which is a guy named Gerald Geisen. And I've already established that this was no lightweight. This was a very serious guy. Unfortunately, he died at the age of 58 in 2001, so he's not around to talk to him. So anyway, he wrote a book called The Private Science of Louis Pasteur, which I haven't looked it up on Amazon, but I did. Maybe Amazon just threw it out, the way they're going. But I did look it up from Princeton University Press, and it's available for the unreasonable price of $185. So that's one way to make a book disappear. If you can't outright ban it or throw it in the bonfire a la the Third Reich, you can just make it really expensive. So that's what's happened with this book. So what is this book about? Well, it's called The Private Science of Louis Pasteur, and basically what it points out is that Louis Pasteur was an absolute fraud, an absolute scientific fraud, and con artist and charlatan. He kept two sets of books, his private notebooks, thus the title, The Private Science of Louis Pasteur. And then he had pronouncements about lab results he got, and about findings that he had, and discoveries that he made, and on it goes. And these things were completely separated from what actually appeared in his notebooks, which he kept private. And not only did he keep them private, he instructed his descendants to keep them private. Now, only one person in the history of science has taken a serious look at the discrepancies between what appeared in Pasteur's private notebooks and what he actually published and what was accepted as science. And that person is Gerald Geisen. Nobody else ever did it. And again, I just have to keep emphasizing this. Geisen was not a lightweight. This was one of the top guys in the field of the history of science. And by the way, it wasn't just history of science. His doctorate was in the history of science and medicine. You would think that if one of the foremost scholars on the history of science and medicine, finally, after decades and decades of this material, Pasteur's notebooks being hidden away, got access to them, read them line by line, and made a detailed comparison of what Pasteur had in his private notebooks and what he put out in public, you would think that would be big news. Well, if you thought that, you would think wrong. If you do any searches on Pasteur, including Pasteur fraud, you will find nothing but videos and articles sanctifying the holy memory of the great saint Louis Pasteur. You won't find anything that questions or criticizes his work methods. Now, you have to admit that if you're a scientist, or if you're even, if you're anybody, keeping two sets of books, one for yourself and one for the public, I mean, that's kind of crooked. I mean, isn't that what Bernie Madoff did? Isn't that what every serious crook does? They've got one set of books for themselves to keep track of what's going on, and they have the one that they put out to the public. And when you consider that Pasteur and his discoveries are considered the foundation, not just, a sideshow, but the foundation of everything that people like Tony Fauci stand for, this is kind of important information. But as I pointed out, it's mostly ignored. And when it's not ignored, it's spun. And when it's spun, it's turned into an attack on Geisen. Not on the guy that kept two sets of books, not on the guy that lied repeatedly about what he supposedly discovered from his scientific experiments, which were which were largely fraudulent. He's not the bad guy. It turns out, according to the experts, now the new experts, Geisen's at fault. So here's a guy. I don't know who this. Let's see. Let's name him. His name is Max Perutz. And what was his claim to fame? Scientist. got a chemistry Nobel Prize, so not a weak hand. But somebody hired him to write a review of Geison's book, the New York Review of Books, in fact. And by the way, Geison is considered the only historian who ever specialized in Pasteur. Like there's nobody else. And again, this guy was I keep hitting this point because it's so important. This was not a lightweight, and he devoted a huge portion of his career to doing this particular research and producing this book. He only wrote 2 books. One came out in 78. This other one about Pasteur came out in 95. So it was towards the end, what turned out to be the end of a long and distinguished career. So nobody else has done the level of research and scholarship that this guy did to understand what Pasteur was really doing. But anyway, Max Perutz, who was hired by the New York Review of Books, wrote this: "Toppling great men from their pedestals, sometimes on the slenderest of evidence, has become a fashionable and lucrative industry, and a safe one, since they cannot sue because they are dead." Okay, let's unpack that one. I don't think Geison needed a job. He was a tenured professor at Princeton. He was distinguished. He was being hired all over the place as a consultant, as a referee for scientific papers. He had no need. So I don't see that this was lucrative for him, particularly lucrative for him. Fashionable? I don't know. The guy dedicated his life to studying the history of science and medicine. That's not terribly fashionable. He seems to me like a serious-minded person. And the American Association of the History of Medicine gave him their annual William Welch Award for this book. So anyway, Perutz continues. Oh, and it's safe since they cannot sue because they are dead. Well, the truth is the best defense. Pasteur did keep 2 sets of books. One that he had held out from the public. One that was completely different from what he promoted to the public. And he instructed his descendants to hide those notebooks. Now, they saved them, and somehow they came out and saw the light of day, and we had a serious scholar, this guy, Geison, looked into it. So the idea that it's a cowardly thing that Geison did, I don't think so. It's a scholarly thing. But Perutz, did he write that? I wonder if even Perutz wrote this, because this is a hit piece. This isn't a scientist. All right, so Geison is in good company. In other words, there's a lot of people that like to take down the great men. Is it a great man who keeps 2 sets of books and lies to the public about the results of his experiments? That's a great man? How is that a great man? This is not like a minor, he had a few little flaws, he had a few personal issues. No, the guy was a professional liar by definition. So anyway, Geison is in good company, but he, rather than Pasteur, seems to me guilty of unethical and unsavory conduct when he burrows through Pasteur's notebooks for scraps of supposed wrongdoing and then inflates these out of all proportion in order to drag Pasteur down. Okay, so he is now accusing Geison of unethical conduct and unsavory conduct and burrowing. What does that mean, burrowing through the notebooks? He read the notebooks in detail. Is that burrowing? Rats burrow. I think this guy Max Perutz burrows. But I don't see how Geison doing a serious line-by-line analysis and comparison of Louis Pasteur's notebooks, private notebooks, with his public publications is burrowing. And these are not, and he talks about supposed wrongdoings. These aren't supposed. Pasteur had one set of facts in his private books, and he put out another set of facts to the public. That's not a supposed wrongdoing. That's a wrongdoing. That's a wrongdoing in accounting, and it's a wrongdoing in science. It would be a wrongdoing. Imagine a doctor. I got two sets of records, one that I keep, and then one that I tell that I publish in the patient's uh, searchable record. Really? I think you'd lose your medical license for doing that. I mean, if anybody loses their medical license for anything other than questioning pharma. All right, so what else? Supposed wrongdoings, and then inflates these out of all proportion. I don't know. I think a scientist consistently and systematically lying is a pretty serious problem. In order to drag Pasteur down, really? If the guy's work can't stand the light of day, is describing the fact that it can't stand the light of day dragging him down? So if you try to find, again, if you try to find information about this book, which again, I'm kind of repeating myself over and over again because it's important. This was a serious, heavyweight, all pro historian of science and medicine. Okay, he wrote a book about the guy whose work, in quotes, is the foundation of modern medicine, and he found out by doing a careful line-by-line comparison of Pasteur's own notebooks with Pasteur's publications that Pasteur was lying. There's no need to put a fine point on this. Pasteur was a liar. So now maybe it all is okay, and maybe a liar can be the work of a liar should be the basis of our scientific and medical foundations today. I don't know. Maybe that somehow that convoluted logic works. But anyway, this is an example of a couple of things. One, an industry propping up a bum as a hero and saint, like they do with Fauci, and making that man the spokesman for what they need people to believe. And then two, this is also an example of when somebody does serious research. And again, serious guy, he put a lot of time into this. Not only is the work ignored largely and kept from the public. I did search Amazon, by the way, and yeah, you can get copies of this book for about, used copies for about $70 or $80. So still no bargain. But they either hide it by ignoring it, or they hide it by making it too expensive for people to access, or they hire hitmen to go out and attack and kill the messenger. So it's a real shame that Gerald Geisen is not around. He passed away in 2001. It would be very interesting to hear what he has to say about what's going on today, but we will not hear his voice. However, we do know that he wrote a book called The Private Science of Louis Pasteur, and you know very well now what that book was all about. So something you will not find. Good luck finding this on the internet. If you know it's there and know where to look and can burrow through tons of fluff that has been posted about Pasteur, you will find this. But otherwise, this is some pretty obscure information. So as always, thanks to the supporters and paid subscribers of Brass Check. You're the reason we can pay the server bill and the email bill, which is not insignificant, and our tech helper bill, which is definitely not insignificant. And if you're not a supporter yet, please consider it, because I don't think you're getting this consistent level of information anywhere else.